A linear array can be used to set out piling with regular distances between pile centres, or used to distribute a required number of piles along an element's length. When the linear array tool is used, you have the option of grouping these elements together. Therefore, if you make changes to the element setting out, all the other grouped objects would update. Certain restrictions apply when grouping elements. For example, if you have a pile that is located on a grid, by default the pile will move with grids. If you then group the piles without the grid, the relationship cannot be maintained. Our first task is to place some piling along a ground beam. To do this, we're going to open up the top of Foundation Plan. Let's zoom in to Grid 3. And you'll notice on Grid 3, we have this ground beam passing through this grid position. Here, we're going to place 3 piles into the ground beam and then group those piles together and copy them to other locations. So let's begin by clicking the Structure ribbon and then Isolated. In the Properties palette, in the Type selector, ensure that you have Round in situ concrete pile family selected, and here we're going to use our 16-inch diameter, 16-foot long pile. You'll notice in the Properties palette that the level that this is constrained to is -0.1 top of foundation. You'll also notice here that we have a height offset from level of -2 feet. That's how our pile is set out on the soffit of our ground beam. So now we can go ahead and place out our first pile. I'll then place another one at an arbitrary position on this grid here, and another one to the left. We can now use temporary dimensions to set out these piles. So I'd like to try and maintain 2.5 times the pile's diameter. So in this case, that's going to equate to 40 inches. I've selected this pile here, you'll notice that the temporary dimensions witness line isn't attached to the correct element. So I can simply drag this to the pile center, and here, again, stipulate 40 inches. So our piles are now set out. The next step is to group these piles together. Now, one of the things we have to be mindful of is the first pile that I placed down is positioned on this grid line here. So consequently, when I group these together, because the grid's not going to be in the group, Revit will show a warning. Let's go ahead and select our foundations. So I'm going to window select them, and then we'll use the filter to remove the structural column, so we've only got the 3 piles in the selection set. Notice up on the context ribbon, I have the option of creating a group. Now, as I've said here, you'll notice that these piles are currently set out on grid. Here, Revit is informing us that a structural element will be detached from the grid due to inconsistent group membership. That's fine, we'll click OK here. And we can name the group, so I'm just going to call this one 3 pile setting out. And then click OK. Now, you'll notice here that we can adjust the origin of our group. I'm going to have this on the grid intersection. Okay, so now that we have our group created, we can then proceed to use the group to populate other grid intersections. To do this, if we look in the project browser, we'll notice that we have a folder titled Groups, and here we have Model Groups. Here's our group that we've just created. I can simply drag and drop from the project browser, and then place the group down on another grid intersection. If we now go into the 3D view and review our model in 3 dimensions, we'll now see these piles in groups. A nice property of a group is that if I want to go ahead and perhaps change the length of these piles, I can select the group, and on the context ribbon, I can edit the group. Now, it might be here that we have a requirement for the center pile to be slightly deeper. So I've selected this pile here. In the Properties palette in the Type selector, I can use a 16-inch diameter pile, but this time 24 feet long. Note when I click the Finish tool over here, all the groups update. Now, if I didn't want them all to update, I could choose one of the groups and I could perhaps ungroup this, which will convert this back into 3 different elements. Next, we're going to use an array to create a linear pattern of piles. Let's open up the -02 lift pit plan. Here, we're going to place some piling underneath this structural wall here. Now here we have a foundation slab which is 24 inches deep. We need to make sure that the top of the pile is set down 24 inches. So we're going to adjust the height offset from level of our pile. So on the structure ribbon, select Isolated. Notice here that we have our 16-inch diameter pile. Once again, it's 16 feet long. And we'll place our first pile on the intersection of these two walls. But note here that we have a height offset from level of 2 feet. Okay, so I'm now going to array this pile. So we can select the pile. And on the context ribbon, we have the Array tool. Let's go ahead and select Array. On the options bar, we have either a linear pattern or a radial pattern. The default is a linear pattern. Here we can stipulate the number of items that we want in the array, and here I'm going to move this to the second item. So I can snap to the original pile that I've placed down, move my mouse to the right, and again here I need to use 40 inches for our setting out. So you can now see that we have our piling laid out. Currently I only have 2 piles. So here we can adjust this. So perhaps we could set this to 8 piles. And you can see that almost takes us to the edge of the wall. Now what I could do here is simply stretch out these piles so I have 8 piles set out along the length of that wall. If I wanted to do that, I could take the last pile here and drag it, and you can see that it will snap to the center line of that wall. Our piling is now set out. Now once again here, if we go into the 3D view, we'll note that that piling now resides inside a group. Of course, if I wanted to change the item inside the group there, I could edit the group, we could select the pile, and as we saw previously, we could change the length perhaps to 24 feet, click Finish, and of course all the piles update.